Hi, welcome. My name is John Leslie, and I'm going to be presenting today with Neri Van Otten. And we're going to talk about how you design data science projects and AI projects. And most of this is in the context of a book we've just written. And we're going to tell you a bit more about the book as the talk goes on. Just to introduce us very quickly, you'll meet Neri in a minute. I'm John. I'm the Director of Data Science at Pivigo. We're a London-based company that we do two things. We design data science projects, and we execute those for our clients, and we also run a data science training bootcamp called Science to Data Science, S2DS. Neri is the CEO of a company called Spot Intelligence and is also a natural language processing expert, and she'll be on in about 15 minutes. I want to start by talking about this concept here, digital transformation. And I imagine if you're in the audience, you're aware of this business that more and more companies, businesses need to adopt and embrace new ways of doing business, new ways of managing their data and extracting meaning and insights and leveraging their data for more streamlined business and more efficient ways of going about what they're doing. And it probably evokes in you concepts such as big data or machine learning or data science, things like that. And often we think of line graphs that are going up and to the right, implying that there's something good happening. And everybody agrees that those are good things, graphs that go up and to the right. And what I want to talk to you about first is what's involved in taking on such imperatives. How do you bring data science into your organization, and where do we find that companies really struggle with doing that efficiently? First of all, why is AI and data science and machine learning, we're going to use all those terms today, but why are they so impactful? Well, as I just mentioned, they can really increase your operational efficiency. They can reduce costs. They can help you to improve the quality of the service you provide, and other things that are a little bit more internal, like understanding your customers better and getting more insights into the markets and marketing campaigns, things like that. There's a lot that you can do with data science, and it can be really useful for your business. And in fact, a recent Gartner study showed that since 2000, half of Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. And the speculation is that a lot of that is attributable to a lack of these companies to really embrace digital transformation, to bring on advanced analytics and data science and AI into their business. And it seems that the reality is that companies that are slow to do that really struggle to keep up. They fall behind, and often they struggle. But what if you're not a huge company? What if you're a small company, a startup or a SME? Well, this is a really important part of the market. 99%, more than 99% of companies in Europe and North America are SMEs, and they make up more than half of the GDP in those areas. However, only about half of those companies are really adopting digital transformations. And there's a number of reasons why they're slow to do that. But one of the biggest ones is that it's risky, it's daunting, and it is expensive. You have to put a lot into it to get anything out of it. And we know that about 87% of data science projects never even make it into production. So knowing that going into it from the start is a big risk can really be off-putting. And it makes complete sense. Well, why would you go into something if you know that the risk is so high? Of those 13%, remaining 13% of projects that are into production, the same study found that only 8% of those ever really generate value for their businesses, which, if you put that all together, means that really only about a 2% success rate for data science projects across all industries. And that's a really alarming and certainly off-putting stat. If I was running a business and I knew that I was going to do something that only had a 2% success rate, I would say, forget it. I don't want any part of that. And I think that's what's happening to a lot of businesses. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can go about data science projects in a more sensible way and try to de-risk the process. If we look at the same Gartner study and we wonder why, what are the causes for this low success rate? Well, the authors sort of point to three main areas. One is that it's hard. Data science is hard. AI is hard. Often it's harder than expected, and that can be because there's unanticipated challenges to the data, to the access to the data, to the structure of the data, or that the scientific questions are actually quite difficult, much more difficult than and much more nuanced than people realized initially. But there are other issues as well. For example, leadership issues and ownership issues. And what I mean by that is that often when a data science initiative is brought into a company, there can be disagreements about who owns it, whose domain is it in. This is usually sort of more at the top end of the company structure, especially when these are successful projects. We've seen often that everybody wants in on something good, and the power of that gets diluted, and that can be really difficult to overcome. Another major reason is what I've termed insufficient organizational alignment. And what that really means is going into the project without a clear idea of what you're trying to get out of it, that not all the stakeholders and that not everybody in the business agrees on what the goal is and what you're trying to accomplish. And when that happens, when there's disagreement, when there's misalignment, it makes it very difficult to deliver an impactful and a successful solution. Neri and I often tell our students that designing a data science project is like building a house. And in our book, we talk about this analogy a bit. We think of data science and AI as algorithms and numbers. You put data in and you turn a lever and crank a shaft and you get insights out. At least, that's sort of the stereotypical naive view of it. But that's very obviously not the case. If you think about a house, you can't just take a bunch of wood and bricks and mortar and glass and throw it together and get a structure out that's going to be useful. And you might get something good, but really, in order for it to be a success, you need to design it carefully. And you design it, that process starts long before you've even acquired the materials, before you've even gotten the stuff you're going to use to make it. And the same thing goes for a data science project. And Neri's going to talk about that a bit more later in the talk. But really, designing the project sensibly from the start, before you even get your hands on the data, is a really important process. And we found that it's one of the ways that projects often fall down. Before they've even gotten started, skipping a careful design phase can be really problematic. Like I said, Neri and I wrote this book. Here's the cover of the book, Designing and Building Data Science Solutions. And we really wrote this to sort of capture our learnings about how you design projects, what has worked well for us. Between the two of us, we've designed hundreds of data science projects. We've made a lot of mistakes, but we've learned a lot of things along the way. And I think by now we've got a pretty good system down for how we design projects. This project of ours started as an article that we wanted to share with our students and with our peers, just to share our findings, and it ended up that we had a lot to say, and so we ended up putting it into a book. You can find the book free online at datasciencedesign.com, and we'll have the link at the last slide, so you can jot that down if you missed it. Or you can buy it on Amazon, and of course, we're very happy for you to do so. Please, if you do have a look at it, if you go to the website, let us know what you think. We're very happy to hear people's comments and suggestions. So if we think about a data science project, and a lot of projects in general, even civil projects, we sort of think of two phases, or we can think of two phases. There's the execution phase where you do the work and you build the thing, and then there's the evaluation phase where you step back and see, okay, did we do a good job? Were we successful? And very often in data science, the temptation is to view a project through this lens. And what we've found is that this is not the best way to go about it, that actually thinking about evaluation can be really important in the design and the execution. And so instead of a linear trajectory like this, like I've shown you here, the reality is much more like this, where in our process, we're constantly evaluating success and then going back to execution and thinking about how what we're about to do could translate into a success. And I'm going to talk to you next about how we look at that evaluation piece. We break our evaluation framework down into 4 levels. I called them contextual, business, product, and project process. And while I would love to take credit for this, it's actually not my idea. It wasn't Neri's idea. This came from a paper we found from Hassawi and colleagues in 2014. This paper talks about these exact same levels, these 4 levels. In their case, it's in the context of large projects like the Sydney Opera House or huge multinational projects. But the same process we found has echoes in how we design data science projects, and we really liked their framework, and so we've adopted it for our own uses in data science and AI. So 4 levels. If you these go sort of from top to bottom in more granular detail. So the contextual level is very abstract. And as we go down into the project process level, this is more concrete. These are actual the things, the tangible things, like how you make code. And I'm going to go into these details in a few minutes. But what's also important to note is that while the abstraction increases as you go up this ladder, so does the impact. And what we found is that the contextual level for assessing success, if a project does well in a contextual level, those are the ones that are going to have the most long-term impact for your client, for your business. If you now you can't have contextual level success without also having product level success. You can't build a bad product and hope to have contextual success. So they all build on top of one another. But while it's difficult to think about contextual success sometimes because it's so abstract, it's very important because that's where the real value of the project is going to be. And I'm going to go into that next, what we really mean by that. So contextual, what do we mean by that? This is really, so essentially it's the context of the project, the context of the business. Where are you? What's the state of the world when you're releasing this project? You can think of it here, sort of summarized in this sentence. It's the circumstances surrounding a project and the externalities that affect it. Now, I know that's a bit ambiguous and a bit vague, and really what it means is what's the state of the world. And there's a great example right now, which is that COVID-19 is ravaging the world and businesses are struggling to adapt. The world is different now than it was in 2019 because of this pandemic. And we find that with our own clients, that if we take sales data from last year, the year before, from 2018 and 2019, and we try to draw extrapolations to the state of the world now, it's very challenging because the world is different. Things are different. People do not behave the same way now that they did before. And so all the truths of the world that were true a year ago are really out the window right now. And that's a great example of how context can affect the outcome of a project. Before COVID-19 came about, when we were first writing this book, the contextual challenge at the time was Brexit for those of us in the UK. Again, how Brexit's going to affect a company's ability to do business is hugely impactful on the outcome, on how the outcome from a project could impact the business. So that's examples of why the context is so important. When we think about the contextual level of evaluation and what it means to have a good context, we really try to think about strategy for our businesses, for our partners. So things like what the strategic imperatives are. That means for your client, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? How are they trying to get there? These are big picture items, broad stroke kind of concepts. Challenges in delivering that strategy. Every business has its challenges. It's important to understand what those are when you're designing a project. If you're designing a project that doesn't really address a challenge, then there's a limit to how much impact it's going to have for your business partner. And the last item on here, missed opportunities. This is something that comes up a lot in our consulting conversations, that we might sit down with a client and we'll talk about their strategy and what they're trying to accomplish. And they'll talk about where they think they're missing opportunities. And a lot of businesses have a pretty good idea where missed opportunities might be, but they're not able to really do much about it. So thinking about where those missed opportunities are can be a great way to try to focus in on what an impactful data science project might look like. The second level in our evaluation framework is the business level. And this is really how much value the project brings to the business. So what do we mean by that? Well, things like concrete metrics, for example, like did it result in increased levels of revenue or time saved or more efficient operations, or things like customer satisfaction that you can measure. For example, if you're building some sort of system that can automatically respond to customer queries, well, that would hopefully lower the response time for a customer complaint or a customer question. That in turn results in better customer satisfaction, which is something that you can probably measure somehow. Unfortunately, a lot of these metrics are complicated. There's a number of confounding factors that affect revenue or how much time you spend or how happy customers are. And you can't always identify exactly how the project impacted that in isolation. So for that, we try to turn towards KPIs, key performance indicators. And usually, what we mean here is how we can assess a project's impact in isolation. And usually KPIs are defined in the design process, the design phase of a project early on. We say, okay, we're going to do a project and we're going to look at these KPIs to assess success. And Neri's going to go into that a bit in her section in a few minutes. And then I also mentioned here less tangible outcomes. So things like insights generated. That can be really important, just understanding the landscape of your business a bit better. Taking a data-driven approach. A lot of times companies really want to start moving in a data-driven direction, and whether or not they actually get initial success is not so important as the process of getting there. And also for a lot of our partners, being able to show that they're a data-driven business can really help with things like getting investors on board and going through funding rounds. Things like that are really important to some clients. So even though it may not have a value attached to it in terms of dollars and cents, that can be really impactful to a client. And the last thing I mentioned on here is understanding the data landscape. This is something that comes up all the time, especially with our clients who are bigger companies who have been around for a long time. They have data in silos. They might have CRM data in one place and customer data in another place and marketing data somewhere else. And those data silos aren't connected. And often there's a huge amount of power from connecting those up and understanding how the different data sources relate to one another that a company can't tap into because they just can't connect it. So being able to see how all those different silos fit together can be a hugely impactful outcome for a business. And it's a really important one to think about if you're the person designing a project, or if you're a business leader thinking about how you might want to start with a data science project. The third level in our evaluation framework is what I called product. This is actually the stuff that you produce. So this is, the deliverables and the technical specifications. Basically, how well did the thing you make satisfy the business requirements? So here we look at things that are a bit more concrete, like model accuracy. If you're a data scientist, the word accuracy probably makes you cringe a little bit because it means something very specific, and it's not always very useful. We also look at, so instead we look at metrics like precision or recall or F1 score. Product performance. So this is, think about like an app or a dashboard, something that actually has to be performant. Is it accurate? Is it interpretable? Is it quick? Does it meet the demand? Things like that. These are real sort of functional requirements for the piece of stuff that you're making. And then there's also things like code quality. Is the code well written? Is it easy to understand? Does it scale well? Those are all considerations when you're thinking about how the project did. And the last level in our evaluation framework is the project process. And this is really, the actions you took, what you did to deliver the product in the end. So here we think about things like, was the project on schedule? Were you within budget? Did you use the right kind of scientific rigor when you're doing your analysis? Did you explore the data well? Did you select the right models? Did you use the appropriate statistical tests to make inferences? Things like that. It also comes down to how well you can use your tools. Doing data science does involve a lot of tools. There's methodologies, there's models, there's packages. Knowing how to use those, knowing what the limitations are, how to interpret models, and being able to code well are all parts of this. It doesn't mean that you have to be an all-star coder to be a good data scientist. You absolutely don't. But you do need to know that if you're not the best coder, it might take you longer to deliver a project. And so when you're designing a project, you need to build that in. You need to account for that. So just to sort of summarize the evaluation part, I told you there's 4 levels: contextual, business, product, and project process. In the book, we go through these in a lot more detail. And if you're interested, please send a question at the end or go check out the book. I'm going to hand over to Neri now for the second part of the talk.
Hello, everybody. And thank you, John, for the first part of the framework that is in our book. I'm going to be discussing the second part of our framework, which is more in the execution, the designing, the building. How do you get from a non-product to a product? How do you go from 0 to 1? How do you make that big picture happen for your client, your business, the project that you are working on? So me and John, we have lots of experience in executing, designing, and bringing that value to businesses. And every single time that we have done a project, we always step back at the end and we evaluate how can we do better next time? What has gone wrong? Let's reflect. This is a little bit why experience matters a lot, and why I wanted to share knowledge, because over time we've accumulated all of this knowledge, all of these processes that we use to streamline our project. And that's kind of what we want to be sharing with you in the second part of the talk. Like, this is our framework and how we structure a project, and this is how we get to successful outcomes. So one of the things is that, you saw the daunting figures at the beginning of how risky data science projects are. But for me personally, I've never had a failed project. And that is surprising, because, the risks are that high. But it's because I design well and I think about it, and I have a process in place that works, and I teach this process as well to others, and it works for others as well. And even though I'm going to be going through this process quite quickly, because we don't have that much time in this talk, I would want you to, look at the book if this is something that interests you, and if you want to learn more on how to make projects successful, because that is what the book focuses on. And I can't really go into that much detail here, but I'm going to cover the framework so that you get an idea of what is in there. So my framework, like John and I's framework, has 6 phases, 1 to 6, as you can see on the slides. The first 3 phases are very much orientated around trying to decide whether a project is worth doing. So after phase 3, after the scoping phase, you literally have to decide, is this project worth doing, yes or no? So there's a lot of work that goes into before even starting a project. And then you get to the crucial point. Do you go back and redesign it, or do you go forward? So before even starting a project, you need to de-risk it as much as possible before doing any type of implementation, before investing the money, the capital. There's a whole process that goes before it. And I want to take you through this process so that you can hopefully adapt some of this in your own processes, and then, have successful projects as well, and not add to the failure rate, because that's what we really want to be avoiding. And moving towards, in our industry, we want to have more successful products, more successful use cases of AI, and we want to really decrease the risk for your projects as well. So this is why I've really written this book and created this framework. I'm also going to be using a little example throughout this discussion so that you get a feel of how this can be applied to an actual project. So I'm going to describe an online retailer that sells running shoes for specialized runners. And they don't actually have physical stores, so they only have an online store. But a very good customer base with lots of loyal customers and fans that love their product. So they have a super good product, but they also have lots of different shoes, because there's lots of different runners that run different styles, different ways. And so not every shoe fits every runner. And there's a challenge for these runners wanting to switch to this brand, trying to find what shoe suits them best. So that's a little bit of an issue that they're having. So they have a system where they have free returns. So if you order a shoe, you can send it back for free, which is awesome, because then customers get to find the exact shoe and they fall in love with the product and they become loyal customers. So that's all very well, except that for the company itself, they constantly have to pay, because they have free returns, they have to constantly pay for the shipping costs until the customers find the correct shoes, as there's no physical stores to try out their shoes. So in this business model, they're having a little bit of a bottleneck in the cost of shipping, which is increasingly driven up by people trying out different shoes before deciding on which one they will finally keep. And they kind of want to remove this decision process for the buyer. They want to be able to find what shoe will fit what runner, and have a process in place that helps them towards that. So that's kind of the business case that we're going to be describing here. So the first phase is indeed the business case. And so you ask yourself, is there a clear business case forming in the first step? If not, you can brainstorm about it, find possibilities. Often companies do come to me or to other data scientists and say, look, you are part of the innovation department or the R&D. We're just trying to look for ways to improve the business and to be part of that this digital transformation and to be part of the future. Please help us do that. So there's not always a clear vision as you go into companies and try and help them. So then the first step is to try and figure out what the business cases are that could be solved. And then there's lots of different ways that you can do this and do an analysis for this. See the book for more on how to do this. But yes, the first step is to define a question and then formulate a hypothesis for that. And once you've got that definition of what you want to be doing, then you can inform the stakeholders of your plan to do this. So for the online retailer that I was talking about with the shoes, there was a clear business case, and the business case was we want to reduce our shipping costs. Help us do that. So that was pretty well defined to begin with, but that's not always your case. So first of all, find a clear business case before moving on to the second phase, which is define success. You can't actually expect to be successful in a project if you don't know what that looks like at the end. So in the beginning, we start by looking at what that means, what is success. And of course, we go back to the other framework as well, which John discussed earlier with the 4 levels of evaluation, how we're going to evaluate the project. But here we're going to be more concrete with how we're going to define what is going to be success at the end of this project. Because if you don't know where you're heading, there's no way you'll be successful. It's not enough to say, let's be innovative, make something that is awesome, that is not being used, that can't be tangible enough, then you don't really know whether you're successful. You could be successful in your mind, but not in somebody else's. So you want to take that uncertainty away, and you want to define success for everybody, and you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page and everybody knows what you're going to be delivering and what the value is going to be to the business. So at this stage, you define who will be involved, what will be included, and what the end product will look like. What is the end goal of this project? And we like to often do this with KPIs, so the key performance indicators. And the way to do this is to use like the SMART system. So you need to be specific. You have to be able to measure progress. Is the goal attainable? How relevant is the goal for the organization? And what is the time frame to achieve this goal? So back to our example with the retailer, is the objective specific? Yes, we defined a specific KPI to reduce the shipping costs for the business. Can it be measured? Yes, we can measure what the shipping costs are for the customers. We also know what the past shipping cost was in a time period previous. So yes, the goal is measurable. Is it attainable? Yes, we've looked at the figures, looked at what the shipping costs was, how many times people are sending shoes back. If that's 2-3 times, we actually want to get that down to 0, right? So we can measure that, and it is attainable in our KPI system. And then how relevant is it for the organization? If you have a well-defined business case, then hopefully the KPI reflects that in a one-on-one kind of situation. So in this case, yes, reducing the shipping costs is relevant. And then for a time frame, you do say you need to measure it over a certain time period. So you'd like to decrease the shipping costs compared to the 6 months previous for the coming 6 months. So you define a time goal as well. And then as part of the defining success, this is also a time to address the feasibility of your project. There's sometimes legal issues or technology that might hinder the progress of your project, or contextual level issues like the COVID-19 situation. So do a feasibility study in a wide variety of domains. Again, go to the book for more information on the different feasibility studies that are available to make sure that there's not a pressing issue with your with your project. One of the things that does come up for the retailer, for the example that I've been using, is storing customer data. So if we want to store customer data to find out, keep track of what buyers liked and what their preference was in shoes, we do need to look at privacy, GDPR, in what countries can what data be stored, is this actually attainable? So that would be part of a legal feasibility to figure out whether we are allowed to keep this data stored, whether we can use it, and whether we can use it to recommend shoes for other customers. So these are all kind of legal issues that you do need to figure out in the legal kind of feasibility study before embarking on the project. So keep those things in mind, because without any of this, it's also impossible to have success, and you don't want to discover these things at the end of your project. So, and then we go into what I think is possibly the most important part of the process, and it's what I like to call scoping. And it allows you to quickly assess the feasibility of a project without actually getting started. But you do get started, but just a little bit. So you tend to time box it, and you can say, I'm going to do a scoping project for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, to just see what I have, what is possible, because oftentimes companies talk about, oh, we have all of this data, and I'm sure you can do X, Y, and Z with it. And even with this online retailer, they're like, okay, we have all of this customer data, but does that mean that the data that they have is actually possible or usable to solve that problem? What state is their data in? How clean is it? How accurate is it? Does it represent the customers that are actually using the platform? Where did the data come from? There's so many questions when you're dealing with data. And this is what the scoping is trying to figure out. Is what we've just defined in the defined success process actually possible with the data or the situation that we're in? So what I tend to do is, get access to the data first of all, do some data cleansing, experiment around with it, see what you have, do some hypothesis testing. How can I reduce the risk? Because in the week or 2 weeks that you're doing the scoping, you're not going to figure out everything that you can possibly learn from this data. You'll have more questions that you can then ask and iterate on. But the point is not to build the product. The point is to de-risk the project as much as possible, to see things, see what is happening in your data, and figure out, what else do I need? Is this goal going to be achievable? Or is there just not enough data? Is the data of a bad quality? Is the cleaning process impossible? Is it just going to take a year to clean this out? As in, there's so many questions that come up in a scoping exercise that you need answered before you can actually even estimate how long a project is going to take, because there's a lot of uncertainty. So the point of the scoping project is to de-risk the entire process and ask yourself the fundamental question: is success possible? And if the answer to that is no, that's a very valid outcome to a scoping project. People always want to have success and say yes, 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 yes. But you need to be very vigorous with yourself at this point and say, no, it is not achievable. Let's go back to the defined success stage. Let's go back to the business case. Let's maybe find a different business case. Let's adapt it. Let's change. Because the last thing you want to go into a project is knowing it's not attainable, but still going ahead anyway because you have the funding anyway, because then you have failure at the end of it. And that is the worst possible situation for everybody. It's better not to do a project than to have it fail, 6 months down the line and have your reputation tarnished that way. And, the business taking a hit. It's just the wrong way to do any kind of business. So make sure that everybody knows that the end of the scoping exercise is where you'll make a decision, and that is okay to fail a project at this point. You've not invested in that much resources. You've invested a little bit of time to the scoping, the defining success phase, but that is very limited compared to the bigger project that you are embarking on. So this is why this stage is so crucial. The scoping part, make sure that you are able to de-risk everything that you can at this point, and to go back to the drawing board if need be. So this is the scoping bit. And once you've decided that the project is successful, you can go on and do the project definition, develop a project plan, have it more modular. What are the milestones, the aims, the stages? How can we be specific? How can we say, we're now going to make a recommendation engine for this online retailer? What is that going to look like? Where are we going to be collecting the data from? What data are we collecting? What data are we storing? What data do we have? This is where you define those milestones, get that out. You also think about the skills and the budgeting, the expertise required, who will be involved, what will they be doing? Do I over budget on this? There's a dilemma there. Again, see the book a little bit for more details. I don't have that much time to go into that now. But then also, how do I manage the project and evaluate the project plan? So project management is a vast field by itself. So you need to set up your project for success. Are you going to do scrums? Are you going to do sprints? Define that here. How are you going to project manage? How is everybody going to communicate? When are you going to have meetings? When are blockers going to be addressed, and by whom? So project definitions is where you think about all of these things. And I know up until now, it seems like you're doing a lot of preparation for a project without actually getting started. And even though that's true, it's not necessarily that daunting. And this is just conversations that you need to have with people on your teams and people are involved and stakeholders. So it's just about talking about it and having those criteria set up so that you can get going, and that once you do get going, everybody knows where you're heading, and it's really easy to execute on the project. So the more time you spend upfront getting all of this sorted, the smoother the whole implementation process will go. And in a whole, the time that your project will take will reduce. So there's a lot to be said of doing this work upfront. And then you get into the gritty bitty bits of it, of actually doing the work. And here you have different stages as well. First, you have the research stage. So I think this is possibly the most important part in a data science project, because you want to be innovative. You want to have groundbreaking research or applications done. You want to be the state of the art. And the only way to do that is to actually read papers, do research, examine what toolings are available, what open source is available that you can possibly build on, what state of the art is out there that we can use for this project. How can we adapt it? How can we change it? How can we build on top of it? How can we benchmark what others have done? Because there's no point of making something innovative if it's going to be worse than your competitors. So this research phase is really important, just to make sure that you are going to be delivering something that is of value. So spend that time doing research. Don't jump right in and think, oh, I can just throw a deep learning model at it, and that's going to be awesome. Do some research into your domain and pick wisely. So this is why I tend to allocate about 25% of my time in this block on the research phase. I think it's crucial to be doing the research. It saves you from iterating and going back and evaluating and saying, oh, this didn't really work for us. If you did the proper research from the beginning, you set yourself up for success a lot more as well. So spend that time doing that research phase. And then another 25% of your time, I tend to say, spend it on prototyping, which means benchmarking, which means building that model, which means building that platform. Checking out what you've learned in the research phase is actually feasible with your data. Figure out where you're going with that. Try and build a proof of concept kind of situation. So the prototyping is a proof of concept. See whether that works. And it's also the time to get it in front of other people. So instead of waiting till the end of the project to get feedback as quickly as possible, because the earlier you get people to see your product and to see what the outcome is, with the recommendation engine for the shoes, the sooner that they can see the questionnaires, that you get that expert knowledge in to be asking the right questions to then add to your recommendation system, the better your end product is going to be. The data science product shouldn't be, hands off. It should be hands-on for everybody involved. That means getting involved quickly, and the faster you can research something, prototype something, get a proof of concept out, the faster you can also have this iteration process when you're building. So it's not about just getting a project and delivering and then done. It's about getting people's input often and early. So that's why I like the prototyping as well, because you can show people a prototype and say, oh, look, this is what I've come up with. Let's think about it some more. Let's go back to the research phase. Let's add. So that's where I see the prototyping stage. And then once we've got a prototype that we're kind of happy with, we tend to go on to the building, the build, assess, rinse, repeat, where there's a lot of stuff happening to actually get a prototype to scale into production. Higher accuracy, even though your prototype shows that you have a model that works, it doesn't mean it works to the extent that is needed. And then once you've got that built, you evaluate your process as well. And evaluation is back to the levels that John described earlier. And then the go-to-client. But the go-to-client is also always backwards and forwards. It's not a one-off thing. And then the important next step is to do a handover, is to think about the long-term success of your project and how you will succeed long-term, who will take care of the project, who will fix bugs. So about writing a manual, making sure that the team can maintain it. Oftentimes, data scientists don't maintain the project as things are in production, and that tends to move to software engineering or other team members, because research and development is a different skill set from maintaining in production. So make sure that the handover is successful as well. This is crucial for long-term success. How do you see the product developing in future? If data changes, how is that model going to deal with it? with the recommendations as well. If new products, if they introduce new products, how can we incorporate this into the recommendation system? How will these resources be allocated? So we ask questions like this, and then that was it. That was the framework. Thank you so much for listening. This is our book. It's free to read at datasciencedesign.com. There's a lot more information on that and how we make projects successful and things that we've learned in our careers. And we would like you to read it as well and give us feedback or add your comments so that we can keep growing this community and sharing so that we can all have more successful projects in future. That's really our vision, the knowledge sharing to get, to learn from others and for you to be more successful and for us to be more successful and to have a community of successful projects instead of failures. So thank you very much. I think we now have a Q&A session. But our questions aren't there. Can you see the questions, John?
I can, yeah. I've got 2 questions so far. How about I read the first one out? What kind of methods would you recommend when a project becomes too grand to handle? I'm not sure what to say about that. I mean, I guess, if the scope, maybe this is an example of scope creep where, what we think is in scope gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that happens all the time. In my experience, when I see that happening, it's important to return to the project plan. This should be a document, something that you and your client have agreed to. Like, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're not going to also do A, B, and C. And if you need A, B, and C, well, we can talk about that. That can fit in as another project, but that is going to come at the expense of our ability to deliver on X, Y, and Z. And I think it's important that your client, usually this kind of thing will come from a client. They'll say, okay, oh, that's great, but we really want this extra stuff that we didn't ask for before. And a good way to approach that is to push back and say, well, look, if we're going to pivot now and do something different, then we're going to dilute our ability to deliver on anything. And what's going to happen, and what often happens in this case, is that you do a mediocre job on a lot of things instead of a good job on a few things. And so it's important that your client understands that. That's not to say you can't pivot. Pivots are an important part of a process, but you have to resist the temptation to just have a short attention span and focus on something else. That's how I would answer the question. Neri, maybe you have a different answer, or you want to expand on that?
All right. Yeah, I think I do the same. Feature creep it happens all the time, and then you have to just sit back down and say, let's prioritize. This is my favorite word. I say, let's prioritize. What is important? Let's get back to the essence. What is more important? Is it this new thing that's coming up, or do you still care about things that you were building, or do you care about both? But we have limited resources, so where do we focus? Let's have a focus meeting. Let's have a prioritization meeting. Let's see what we can still get done with the time or the budget that is assigned to us, and let's figure that out. So it's about having those discussions. I think that's my advice.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. That kind of thing happens a lot. It's not uncommon for the scope of a project to creep, and it's your job as a data scientist to be fairly firm in what's in scope and what's not. The second question here is, what type of motivation could be used for tech employees?
I have advice for that.
Okay, go ahead.
Tech employees, they're like me. They love challenges, right? We love to build and be challenged and do new things. And one of the things that I like doing with people that I mentor is ask them, what are you interested in? What do you want to be doing? What do you want to be building? I know you have this boring data cleaning work here, and it happens, right? And you're going to get burnt out if you keep doing that for months. So what is it that you care about? How do you see your career progressing? And how can I help you with that? And I'm mentoring 2 people at the moment, and they are doing this exact thing. They're doing data cleansing, and they're reading boring documents and manually extracting things out of it, because that's what the company needs, and it's an early stage startup. So they need this work done. So they need them to do that. But then I said, well, why don't we do a side project? People people love side projects. I love side projects. It's my, gist of my existence. And you say, okay, well, we're doing this work, but let's do a side project as well. What is the one thing in machine learning or in tech that you want to be learning about? And both these people, independently of each other, because I've had one-on-ones with them, they both came up and said to me, well, I'd want to build a recommendation system, like it interests me. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Let's find a way that this relates to the business as well. So we found a way that a recommendation system could be relevant for the business. And what we've now set up as a plan is for them, as a side project, besides their own work, to go and build a recommendation engine on the side, on the data that they have, to kind of show us a proof of concept. So it's going to be a proof of concept that they're going to be building so that they can show this the CEO, and the CEO can potentially use this to then get investment on the top of that. But the point is, they're super excited to get done with to get involved in the recommendation engine, to get involved with machine learning. So even if your tech people are doing a lot of boring, fundamentally coding work, there's always a possibility to get them involved in something else, in a side project. So then if they need a break from the boring stuff, they can spend an hour a day, instead of that going to waste because that their minds have stopped functioning on this particular topic. They can switch gears and still be productive for the company on company time instead of being burnt out. And especially during a pandemic, this is very important. So it's about showing you having that human connection with your employees and saying, how can I help you help me situation? You're basically a team, and you need to motivate your employees with what motivates them. So first of all, find out what motivates them. It's probably some technical thing that they are interested in, that they want to build on, that they want to advance their career on, and make sure that can happen. Make sure that can happen on company time, and that motivates them to do the other boring stuff that you're asking them to do. And that offsets it very, very easily. So that's kind of what I'm doing, and it works really well. It gets people to stay, it gets people to motivate it gets people to grow, because the last thing you want is for your employees to stagnate, right? You want them to grow, you want them to advance, and you want your skills to transfer to them so that they become more independent and grow as data scientists or technical people. So the side projects that they can do during working time is my big recommendation. Tech people love this. I love this.
There's one more question. I'm not sure if we have time for it or not. How about we go until we get cut off? Do you think the shortage of data talent is a reason for project failures? Me personally, no, I don't think that's true. There is somewhat of a shortage of data talent. I think that problem is getting better. There are more and more paths into data science now than there were even 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think it's the talent that's the problem. I really think it's the project definition. Project design is the biggest problem. Neri, you may have a different opinion.
Yeah. I've mentored hundreds of junior data scientists, people who have come off with PhDs, who are smart and have zero data science experience, and they have gone through the STDS bootcamp, and they've done a very successful project in 5 weeks' time with zero experience in the data science space. Obviously, I was there as a technical mentor to guide them, but they ended up doing the project and all of it, right? I don't get involved with it, any coding. I would give advice when needed, but I've seen smart people do incredible things just in a 5-week span. It's amazing. So do they have talent? Yes. Is there loads of talent? Yes. But they need to be guided, and they need to be, they need to have resources like this book to tell them how things are done, because it's very different coming from academia to going in industry. It's a different skill set on how to build. So I don't think it's about talent. I think it's about education and guidance. And this is kind of what me and John focus on a lot, and where this book comes from, and where our expertise comes from, because we guide a lot of people in this process. So I think there's amazing talent out there, people who understand mathematical modeling, who are able to build, who are able to code. There's so much talent. It's just not being used in the correct way, or utilized in the correct way.
Okay, our time is up. So I think we head off to the, is there a Q&A room, or what's it called? Sorry.
Yes, it's the Zoom link. It's
the Zoom link.
Ask the speaker anything session, I think it's
called.
called.
Ask me anything corner. So we'll see you there.
Yes, thank you so much.
Say hi. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.